Okay, so the first thing that we're going to go over in our tree of topics are the GoDaddy passwords. There are many passwords that go along with maintaining a website, and although you may not be using the web host provider, GoDaddy, you'll still have the same amount of passwords, basically, most of the time, no matter what web provider you go with. So if you can follow this how-to that shows what passwords to use and why you have so many passwords, then it'll hopefully allow you to understand which passwords to use at what time. Now basically you have two sets of passwords. These are all the passwords that I have for maintaining my websites. All of these passwords have been changed, so none of these are actually my true passwords, but these are all of the things, all of the numbers, IDs, passwords, usernames that I have to memorize or have to know in order to maintain my website. And this is probably going to be pretty common for any web hosting provider that you choose. So let's go over why you need so many passwords and usernames. So I made this diagram up to show you. You'll have two sets of passwords for the most part. You'll have one password that you use to access or to log in to your host provider's website. So I have one password to log in to the GoDaddy website, or my account on GoDaddy. Then I have one other password and username that goes along with my domain name. So these two things are separate, but you need both passwords and usernames to have full control over what you upload and all of the account settings. Okay, so let's start looking at the pins and usernames and passwords. So the first one is pretty obvious. At least with the GoDaddy, you'll get a telephone call pin, just like with any company that has a support desk on telephone support desk. When you call their support desk online, they'll ask you for your customer number and your telephone pin. And it's only through giving them this telephone pin that you'll be able to ask them the questions about your account or your website questions, and then they can answer you. Okay, so the second number that we have on our list of username and passwords is what we call, or what GoDaddy calls, a customer number. It's also referred to as a username. So when you create a GoDaddy account, this will be the first number that you don't create it, but this is the first number you receive an email, and it's the first password that you create. You will be using your customer number and that first password in order to access or to log in to your GoDaddy account. Once you log into your GoDaddy account with these passwords and usernames, you'll be able to, of course, access a GoDaddy account. You'll be able to access site files via the GoDaddy FTP file manager. That's their special tool which allows you to upload files onto their server. It's a decent tool. Sometimes using your host provider's upload FTP files are a bit managers are a bit slower than using other FTP software that you have stored on your computer. Using this account name and password, you'll also be able to access the GoDaddy control panel. Now on other websites contract out, and instead of having their own control panel, they use something such as cPanel. And these panels just allow you to easily configure your website without having to know a lot of scripting and coding. So it's all GUI based website configuration. Okay, so we've gone over what your customer number is and what that first password is for, and you'll receive these in the same email. So remember that which password goes with which username. That's very important. Okay, so there's two other ways to upload files, as we talked about in the previous video. There's actually a lot, like we said. One of the more common ones is FTP applications is FileZilla. A lot of people also use, if they're using a Windows operating system, they'll use the file browser in order to FTP files onto their server. So if you're going to use one of these, then you open, like let's say you're going to use your Windows file browser in order to gain access to your website. You open the file browser and then you type in, instead of a local path, you'll type in FTP, your domain name. Once you press enter, then it'll pop up a second window that asks you for your domain name, the username that goes along with the domain name, and the password that goes along with this domain name. And after you enter in these three pieces of information, you'll be able to access the files that are on your website, on the server, the GoDaddy server, and you can easily upload or delete files just through a regular Windows browser. Another tool which you can use is FileZilla or Microsoft Visual Studio 2008. When you open FileZilla, it'll ask you for, I think they ask for the host name. So when it asks you for your host name, you can either enter the IP address. This IP address will be provided by your GoDaddy account. So you can either enter FTP : / your IP address, or you can also give FileZilla your domain name, FTP : /seekerresume.org. These two things are interchangeable a lot of times with FTP applications. For FileZilla and Microsoft Visual Studios, after you enter in the IP address, then it'll also be asking you for your FTP username, same as with the file web browser. And they'll also ask you, once again, for the password that goes along with your domain name, goes along with your IP address for that domain, where that domain name is located. Now, if you don't know what I mean when I say domain name, that's simply the name which represents your website address. So, example, my domain name is seekerresume.org. If I type this into internet browser, if I type in the domain name into the internet browser, it'll bring me to my website, and this is just a sample page I have on my website right now. So as you can see, there's basically two passwords that you'll need: the one to access your account, your host provider account, and the one that goes along with your domain name. Also, when you're registering or when you're creating an account with GoDaddy, when you go through this process of creating a GoDaddy account, it'll ask you if you already have a domain name. If you don't have a domain name, which is this right here, then you can create one at that time. The domain name is separate from the host provider, but you need these two things together in order to have your website. You need the server, and then you need a domain name. So if we go back to our password list, we talked about what the FTP username is. We talked about the second password, and then we also talked about what the domain name is, and then we also talked about the IP address. The IP address is given to you by your server provider, and so if you're looking for your IP address, you can find it on your GoDaddy account or your host provider's website once you log in. Okay, last thing we haven't talked about is what this login ID is. I also have another login ID. This one is actually an optional one. When you create a domain name, you have the option of having your identity, which means your first name, your last name, your address, etc., linked with that website. So anybody who has your domain name, seekerresume.org, can go to a domain lookup website, and by typing in your domain name, be able to find out who owns that website. Now, if you don't want this functionality, then, and you're creating your domain name, you have the option of protecting your privacy, and so you pay an extra fee to have your name not associated with your website. By doing this, you get another user ID. With GoDaddy, since when I created my domain name, I did that when I was also creating my GoDaddy account. So the people who protect my identity from my username or my domain name, sorry, are called the domain by proxy. There's actually a separate company who handles domain name and identity. So here is a website that you use this last login ID with. When you log in to this website, the domain by proxy website, you will be using their login ID with your GoDaddy password. So it's probably one of the more confusing things, because you would think you would have another password for another login ID, but that's not the case. Okay, so if you don't fully understand what I mean when I say protect your identity, there are websites which you can go to where you can look up people's names using their domain names. So here's a website, simple website. So if I take their web domain name and then go to this website and type and then hit search, you can see it'll give me the registrant's name, their address, the state the country which they live in, and other information about that person. Now if you go to my website, you highlight or you grab my domain name and you go back to this domain lookup website, type in search, it will give you other information about my website, or about my domain, like when it was created, when it expires, etc., etc. But it gives you no information about me, about the registrant. So this is a kind of protection that you get when you pay the fee to not have your identity associated with your website. Some people want it, some people really don't care about it. Okay, so we've gone over all of the basic username and passwords and pins that go along with maintaining a website. And it is important that, I guess the main conclusion of this is that once you start getting those passwords and usernames, you just start writing them down or memorizing them, because if you lose track of them, it gets really confusing, just because there's more than just one username and one password. You have username and password for various things. So I think that's all for that's about it for this section of the topic tree.